Hi, I'm Marc Loftus, and in this post-TV podcast, we welcome composer, sound designer Michael Gatt, whose credits span television series, documentaries, games, animated projects, commercials. Michael, pleasure to meet you, pleasure to speak with you, and look forward to hearing about your career.
Great to meet you too, Mark. Thank you so much. Thanks. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a chance to look at some of your credits online, and I mean, you really have done a lot of different things. Recently, you're doing a lot of animated work, which is pretty amazing. You've done commercials, you are a musician who's done touring and stuff. I'm always interested to hear about a talent's career and how you get into the business where you're at now, where you're working on shows that are, popular shows, and you've done Shark Week, you've done work with Teen Titans Go and animated series, you've done a Minions game. I mean, let's step back and talk a little about your early career and how it led you to this place in post-production.
Well, that is a long and winding road.
Yeah.
as has been sung. And it was basically playing in bands and self-producing records and going after the dream of the record deal and all that kind of stuff, when record deals were more of an analog domain. And then I kind of I settled in LA for music, and I ended up quitting music. And I sold all my possessions and I went traveling for about 4 years. And that was the way I financed that. Was I was doing production sound for Animal Planet and Discovery Channel along the way. So they might do a show in in Ecuador and in Galapagos, and I would go with them and say, leave me there. And then a year later I'd be living in Rio and they'd say, we have a show in India. And I was like, yeah, just get me there and I'll do it.
Wow.
And that was a great way for me to also get a lot of exposure to music, all over the world. And when I came back from that, I ended up doing TV commercials. So writing jingles and scoring commercials. And that was an amazing training ground for basically for anything that involves scoring music to picture, because the turnarounds are lightning fast. And the genres are infinite, and it's often like a mashup of genres. So, and it's all blind competition when you're scoring TV commercials. So there's nothing to speak for you except your music. And there's no prize for second place, if you will. So that's kind of how I cut my teeth on scoring for picture. And then I think like anyone else in especially in the arts, I kind of nurtured some opportunities, and when I got them, I just threw myself at them. One of them actually was a relationship that I had developed, doing these Shark Week shows as a sound person. I said, hey, give me a shot at scoring the music for one of the shows, and it went fantastic. I ended up doing 5 more Shark Week shows. I went and recorded with live orchestra. That music actually ended up kicking off the 25th anniversary album for Shark Week. And it was a great way for me to get familiar with long form composing, doing that kind of long form work.
What do you show somebody in a case like that, where you haven't done it before and you're asking for them to trust you to maybe do one of these projects for the first time? What is your resume? I mean, obviously you've done production sound, you're a musician. How do you convince them to do it? Is it just that you had such a good relationship as a production sound recorder or a mixer that they were like, you know what, I'd give you a try. You've come through all the other times that we've counted on you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's certainly an amalgam of all those things. I mean, the producer, Jeff Kerr is his name. He's still a good friend and was very kind to believe in me, but also he knew, he had been to my studio. I had a studio in Santa Monica at the time, and he knew, that I was doing commercials for, Tylenol and Nike and, brands of that level.
Okay. So they knew that you had commercial credits that you delivered on.
Yes, correct. That's correct. So it's that, and frankly, and this is just as an overall, it's a lot of it's about confidence,
Mm.
about instilling the confidence in the people that are considering you, that you are the person for the gig, and that's true today as it was when I first started.
So you're working on 15 or 30-second commercials, or maybe even a 60-second commercial. Now you're
Yeah.
working on longer form content for television and stuff.
Yes.
What's that initial experience like? Is it nice to know that you're not trying to jam a theme together in such a short time and you have a little more time to explore it? Or are you like, wow, I've got a lot of space to cover now? So
Well, this is that's a great question, Mark, because it definitely reveals some things about my humble beginnings, if you will, in that I kind of was learning by doing.
Mhm,
I'm not formally trained in music, um, and or in film score for that matter.
mhm,
So I did find that when I first dug into this, I was bringing all these short form chops to it, and I was over scoring. I was scoring by the second, which is what you do when you score commercials.
mhm.
And you don't need to do that if you're scoring a 3-minute scene. In fact, it's going to do disservice to the storytelling if you overscore. I mean, of course, I mean that's a very nuanced conversation, because when you do animation, sometimes actually you do want to score by the second.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
but um, but I think you get my point, is that I kind of had to switch gears, and I kind of, it was a lot of trying and failing and trying and failing, and then and then hitting it. And certainly to your point about getting themes and leitmotifs going, that was a huge part. And eventually I developed a whole um, approach to how I would take on long form.
Okay. And now, more recently, I had mentioned the Teen Titans Go. I think it was DC Superhero Girls you're working on.
Hmm.
It's an animated series or a feature?
DC Superhero Girls is an animated series, and then Teen Titans Go. Okay, this is the title. It's Teen Titans Go and DC Superhero Girls Mayhem in the Multiverse
Okay.
is a movie, and that's coming out. I don't know when this will release, but I think it's coming out July 2022. Um, and it's a super fun movie, and it has well, it obviously has the Teen Titans and DC Superhero Girls in it, but it has a lot going on in it. It
But you
was
were
super fun.
working on Superhero Girls as its own series prior
That's
to
correct.
the feature. Okay.
Yes, yes, yep, yep. And I also had also for Warner Brothers, two Batman films come out. Batman the Long Halloween Part 1 and Part 2. And these films were they were based on one of the most iconic canons in or iconic series in the comics. And those films are on HBO Max now, I think. But
Mhm.
that was one. You were asking me like a little bit about my process. That was one where I decided to do the entire score with synthesizers, and just no orchestra, effectively no orchestra. So.
Okay. Okay. On the DC Superhero Girls, and again, you've
Mhm.
worked on 70 episodes of it. What are the needs for that? How long are the episodes, and what are the musical needs that you need to deliver per episode? Are you delivering shorter cues? Are there longer cues? Like, how much elements do you actually have to deliver for that? And do you get into kind of like a rhythm there of what the show needs?
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely, especially a show like that, where on that show, there's the DC 52, like the 52 main characters, villains and heroes of the DC universe. Uh, you know, there were themes established for basically every character, and bespoke instrumentation for each character. So especially after a season goes by, you're like, wow, I really know. There's a whole language now,
Hmm. Hmm.
established musical language that's been established for the show, and so that makes it easier in some respects, because you have a launch point, for each scene. And yet at the same time, you're always trying to reinvent the wheel with this stuff. Or there's a new villain introduced, which is going to be a new theme and a new
Hmm.
sound. And And you asked about like what's expected. I mean, expect now more than ever. And this actually speaks to composer workflow, if you will. It is all about speed and quality, and basically not trying, but actually delivering. This is what it was like in commercials, like delivering broadcast quality work in a relatively short amount of time.
I can imagine that it is helpful to have these themes established for different characters where you say, okay, this character, I know that this is the instrumentation or the tempos that I work with.
Yeah.
For each episode though, how much music do you deliver for that? How many different cues do you think an episode might use?
So the Superhero Girl show there are 11-minute episodes, and there could be as much as 9 to 10 minutes of music in each one. Yeah. So it's and in animation, it can often be what we call a lot of starts, which is like cue, 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 instead of one long 3-minute cue.
Mm-hmm. Do they make use of the like? Does the series put together a library over time where you can reuse music, or is it always new music every episode? Like, do they ever go back and use so and so's track from it? Something that you've created, but a theme that you've already established.
That's not something that was done on Superhero Girls. I mean, that was you're always revisiting the themes, that's for sure. But always in new ways.
Okay. You've got a relatively new space there. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came together, the design, and who you may have worked with?
Absolutely, yeah. So I worked with a studio designer named Derek Trost, who was just a wealth of information and support in tackling this structure. We took it down to the studs. We built extra walls to tune up the room modes. I mean, this is all under Derek's direction, of course, and then added masks everywhere, and followed it all the way into the interior sound treatment. And it's all been designed for surround, and it's just performing beautifully. I'm a huge advocate. If you're going to do something 40 to 70 hours a week, which is sometimes what happens in this industry, then set yourself up.
Cool.
As far as the tech side of things go, that's just an ever evolving labyrinth that ironically is, or I mean, purposely, I've been trying to get more and more elegant with. So for example, I was running 5 networked machines at one time, and the way most composers work that do what I do is that we have the whole orchestra and all of our synths and everything you can imagine is already preloaded into our template. So it's all about getting out of the way of your creativity and being able to say, I want a solo trumpet, or I want a brass ensemble, or I want a trumpet section, or whatever, and being able to just pull that up instantly and write and move on. And so I'm now actually pulling that off on one computer as technology advances. And I just went to Dante. So the whole studio is now Dante, and that's all using Rednet with Focusrite stuff, which has also been a revelation as far as ease of use and
what are the advantages of that? Is that your different workstations are then synced and networked? What is the advantage of using, say, Rednet for these different workstations that you're using? Maybe you're using one for an orchestra, maybe you're using another for something else. How does that tie things together?
Well, I could tell you just in the most basic sense, for me, I mean, it's right here in front of me. It kind of looks like like the Enterprise. There's just I have faders and controllers and a touch screen, and so it's all about not having to shift my attention away from anything for too long. And so, just for example, with it's the R1 controller, I can control my mic pre's from the same controller that's A/Bing between 5.1 and stereo, and my volume knob and my headphone talkbacks is all happening on one device. And for me personally, uh, what really attracted me to the design was that, just the same way I love Cubase as a tool for writing, is I feel like Cubase is truly software. It's like it's truly malleable and user friendly in the sense that you can design whatever you want it to be. And I found this Rednet stuff to be the same thing, where if anything, this volume controller is almost like a monitor to display what's happening with the software. So the GUI interface of seeing my input levels and my output levels and being able to customize which speaker selections I'm doing, it doesn't sound, or it may not sound like a big deal to anyone who doesn't do what we do, but for me, it's fantastic.
You mentioned Cubase. I was going to ask you, what are some of the tools or programs that you're using for writing, for mixing, for editing? Can you talk a little bit about that? Obviously,
Sure.
a lot of people are using
Sure.
Cubase, a lot of people are using Pro Tools. What's your selection there?
Well, I certainly don't discriminate. I think whatever gets you the results you want, that you like. I mean, that's the answer. But for me, I'm using what's pretty well established in a lot of film music circles, which is I write in Cubase and and everything lands in Pro Tools. Pro Tools chases Cubase. So Pro Tools for me is playing back dialogue and picture, but the cursor is being controlled by whenever I hit the cursor in Cubase.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, what that does is that means that if as I start to migrate cues into Pro Tools, not only do I have a 30,000 foot view of where I'm at in the film, but I can be in a new writing session in Cubase and start the cursor a little before I'm going to write, and it's playing out the tail of the cue I've already written, and that's playing back from Pro Tools. And then as I finish the cue that I'm writing now, it might play into the next cue. So much of what I'm doing is about context, and without that kind of real-time feedback, it proves to be much more difficult.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Your studio space you have there, is it one large room that you're kind of doing it all in? Do you have separate booths for isolation, or is it just like one creative space where you're at the desk and you're, hitting record and there you are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have two answers to your one question, because you had brought up how my flow for commercials had kind of worked into what I'm doing with film score. A huge caveat and difference between what I'm doing with long form is that very often what I'm writing in MIDI is ultimately getting orchestrated and recorded by live players, whether that's a full orchestra or a handful of soloists to kind of spruce up things. And to that end, I used to, in my last facility, I had a large live room, and I ended up always having the performers, assuming that it was, just a vocalist or a string player, I'd always end up having them come into my writing studio with me, and we'd all put headphones on, because I found the intimacy of that kind of real-time connection versus being, through glass or being, through monitors. I think this is very apropos, but to take everything to another level. I felt like there was a lot more synergy there when you got to do that. So long answer to your question is, I do most of my live records, if they're going to be in person and they're going to be a small amount of people, I do them all in this room.
When do you get to work with other, live musicians as opposed to doing MIDI or programming? Is it when something is beyond your expertise? Is it where you need, something that computer generated sound, which is amazing these days anyway, just doesn't give you what you're looking for? Like, when do you make that decision? And I would imagine timeline and budget has a lot to do with it too. Is like, when you have to deliver it, how much time do you have?
Yeah, and it's really ultimately budget is what it ultimately comes down to. But that being said, I mean, you find very, very creative ways to make sure, I mean, at least I do as a matter of policy, of artistic policy, to find a way to have something live on every track. I mean, for me personally, my first instrument is guitar, and I also, play a lot of stringed instruments, and just one or two live, human players or a human voice, the listener's ear automatically goes to that first.
Mhm.
And it's amazing how it can elevate things. But that being said, there is, as the saying goes, nothing like the real thing. So as far as the tech and the samples and the virtual instruments have come, there is nothing like a human being, putting a bow across an instrument. It just, and especially too with the overtones, of having people play together in the same room. And there's something that happens.
Do you do the final mixing on your tracks, or do you give it to them as just, individual tracks, which then the mixer for the show will balance out the way they want it to be? What is the level of finality, I guess, when you
Yeah.
deliver?
Well, all of my stuff, everything I do leaves here and goes to a mixer before it goes to the dub. The dub mix is where they take. I'm sure you know what the dub mix, of course. But so for example, Brad Hanel, who's a mixer I've been working with for years, and it's actually the guy who's been telling me about Dante for years, and I could not wrap my head around. He got into Rednet and Dante, like, I don't know, it was probably like 8 years ago, and I just couldn't look at an Ethernet cable and imagine like what he was saying
Right,
at the time.
right.
But I'll, for example, I'll send, my stuff to Brad in a very, very, very wide set of stems, like 60 plus stereo stems. And then he will mix, and then it'll come back to me, and then it'll ultimately go to the studio.
Okay, and is that a 5.1 mix? Is it a stereo mix? What are they
Yes,
using?
yeah. Well, actually, that's that's something that's become a new standard, at least for my own personal standards go, is that whatever the delivery demands are, we're always mixing in surround now, and we're always delivering in surround.
Okay.
And I think the or beyond, like into Atmos, because I think, especially as we've seen as technology keeps advancing, and I think the revelation of AirPods now having this virtual surround and stuff happening, it's inevitable that you're going to want this material in that format.
You had mentioned, kind of being reticent to maybe adopt Dante and stuff, but now you're on board with it. You've got other studio upgrades planned in the near future. You've got some new gear coming in. Anything you want to mention, or?
Yes, I'm staring at 3 gigantic 82 pounds each boxes that have Vocal Trio 11 BEs in them. So that's going to be my LCR, and all this Focusrite stuff is now digitally feeding a Trinoff Demon over Dante. So yeah, it's this endless quest to get things as elegant as possible, and get things, like anything, like everyone wants, as transparent as possible.
Mhm.
Especially because even though all of my stuff is being mixed by, in my opinion, the best mixers in the industry, I should say some of the best mixers in the industry, the reality is that my material, before it ever sees a mixer, or ever sees a live musician, or ever sees an orchestra, I have to get it approved by the client.
Mhm.
And the standards and the levels of expectation now are so high, I think reasonably so, that what comes out of my work has to be like ready for prime time, if you will, before
So
it gets to those final stages.
your initial tracks go to the client for approval before you then have, I guess, confirmation to get the live musicians on board to recreate it. Then there's a
Yeah,
scratch track.
they're yeah, I mean, I think a scratch track would be a minimization of it. I mean, it's like it is really a fully realized, if we're going to go record with a 100-piece orchestra, you're hearing an emulation of like what that
expectations would
Is
be for it.
yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah. And generally speaking, you know, as you're writing, what what's the future holds as far as like where this is going to land, and you write accordingly, you know.
Do the clients ever say to you, "This sounds pretty good. What do we need the live musicians for?"
Uh, you know, I mean, I have to, you know, I do pride myself on my what we call mock-ups.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think and so I have gotten that kind of feedback. Not necessarily like what do we, you know, what do we need live for, but certainly like this really sounds great.
Mhm.
And I'm always quick to like say, then I'll always say confidently, just wait until you hear what this is going to be like when we have the live players on. Yeah.
It'll be even better than what you've got right then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's I had a colleague of mine, again, the virtual instruments are incredible, and the amount um of flexibility I have in being able to manipulate the virtual instruments is just crazy what you can do now, with respect to, like, you know, for example, taking a string section and, you know, controlling the vibrato and the tightness, and you know, if they're going to be short notes, how short are they going to be, you know.
Mhm.
And of course, you know, I'm getting into the weeds of the craft of it, but you'll like modulate that shortness a little bit to try and fake a little bit or emulate that it's, you know, it's real. But sorry, I lost my train of thought
No,
there,
that's.
buddy.
I guess one last question I have for you is, what's next for you? Are you working on the Mayhem in the Multiverse? Is that the next project that you're on? Do you have other stuff coming up? Like, what can we look forward
uh
to?
that is the next project that I have that's being released, and that's getting released soon. And I am working on something that I'm extremely excited about, like very excited about. And at the risk of sounding very Hollywood, I cannot talk about it.
Okay.
But not yet. And I'm sorry, I should have covered that with you before we
Is
got
it
on the
is it a
call, Mark. But
feature, a television show, a streaming series? Can you get?
I can't.
Can't
It's
talk.
yeah. I'm so sorry, Mark. Yeah, I should have mentioned that. Yeah,
No, that's okay.
I'm
That's okay. Maybe
uh
that's something that we can follow up with down the road. Hear a little bit about that project once
yeah,
it's
that'd be wonderful. That'd be great,
cool.
because that will be something, for what it's worth, that does follow in a grand way from computer screen to lots of people with lots of instruments.
Ah, okay. Excellent. Well, I mean, hey, Michael, that's a great conversation that we've had. I know that there's a lot more depth that we can get into, but you know, in the half hour that we've been speaking, I think our audience is going to appreciate how somebody makes the transition from artist to commercial work to longer form stuff to steady series work, animated stuff, and now even features. So exciting to get that insight from you, and we appreciate you sharing it with us.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. And I guess I would add, I don't, you know, you and I were kind of chatting before this conversation. I was saying, like, you know, that what's worked for me, you know, when someone tells you how they did it, I've heard it put, they're just giving you old lottery numbers, winning
Do you
lottery
have
numbers.
advice that
But
you
I
could
will,
give? Do you have advice that you could give somebody that's
yeah,
maybe, you know,
I mean,
thinking about?
I do think there's philosophical things, like the idea. I mean, this is like a 2,000-year-old saying, but the idea that luck is preparation meeting opportunity. I've met a lot of people. I mean, I lived, you know, I in LA for a long time, so I met a lot of people who were always looking for those opportunities, but weren't necessarily prepared. Some of
Mm,
them, and so I think one of the advantages we have as as music meets technology is that you really can be. You don't need to wait for anyone to make your art. And so I would say my advice would be just like keep doing the work, keep making the music. So if you do meet someone or do generate a lead or do get an opportunity and they say, great, I'd love to hear your reel. In fact, I'm shooting a horror movie, let me hear your horror tracks.
mm.
Well, you better have something. I mean, for me personally, I had spent so much time doing commercials that when I first started out doing long form and I get these kind of requests, I would just stay up all night and write a reel.
Just so you had a
But that's,
sample that you could show somebody
yeah,
should they ask for a certain genre or something.
yes, yeah. I just realized that my dog's making a cameo
He's
here.
been very well behaved. Cool.
So yeah, anyways, I say that with all humility. I just have found that that yeah, you just got to get down to business and get to work.
Cool. Well, again, thank you for your insight, Michael, for sharing with us a little bit about your career path, some of the things that you've learned, some of the things that you can share for other people that are aspiring to do that type of work. I think they're going to appreciate hearing it right from you.
It's my pleasure, Mark, and I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And
Sincerely,
hopefully we can talk again down the road when your next job is completed.
That would be great. I would love that.
Excellent. Thanks again for your time, Michael.
Cheers. Thanks. Have a good one.